The mysterious discovery of a young woman's remains inside a heavy green tarp forever altered the quiet landscape of Georgetown, Kentucky in 1968. This cold case remained a haunting enigma for 3 decades, until an obsessed internet sleuth finally connected the digital dots to find the truth. Unresolved questions about the identity of the victim and the motives of her silent killer continued to linger within the archives of American crime. On the evening of May 17th, Wilbur Riddle scanned the dark brush of Route US 25 while waiting for his drilling supervisor to arrive. He searched the uneven ground for discarded telephone pole insulators, hoping to collect enough scrap metal to earn a few extra dollars that night. Amidst the scattered glass bottles and rotting forest debris, a large and oddly shaped bundle caught the reflection of headlights from the passing cars. Curiosity drove the well-digger toward the embankment where a bunched-up green canvas tarp sat heavily against the thick and overgrown Kentucky weeds. Wilbur nudged the mysterious object with his heavy boot, expecting the cold resistance of metal, but instead feeling something unnervingly soft and very pliable. The bundle rolled down the steep slope and partially unraveled, revealing a sight so macabre that the man's throat tightened in sudden, primal terror. A human leg protruded from the industrial fabric, and the hard object his foot had just struck was actually the head of a person. Overcome by a sense of dread, Wilbur scrambled back to his truck and drove toward the nearest gas station to contact the local authorities. Sheriff Bobby Vance and his deputies soon arrived at the desolate scene, where an overwhelming stench confirmed the presence of a decomposing human body. The officers carefully cut open the canvas layers to find a young woman whose life had been extinguished in a cruel and calculated manner. Investigators found no personal belongings or identification near the victim, leaving her identity a complete mystery to the shocked men at the scene. Because her body was wrapped in material typically used for shelters, the nameless girl was officially dubbed the Tent Girl by the local police. Dr. James Mlellan performed the autopsy at St. Joseph Hospital, noting the victim stood 5 feet tall, with distinctive reddish-brown hair and teeth. A noticeable gap between her front teeth became the only defining physical characteristic that might one day lead to her true name and family. Medical experts estimated that she had been deceased for nearly 3 weeks, but the advanced state of decomposition made a facial sketch very difficult. No bullet wounds or signs of a struggle were found on the remains, suggesting a more silent and suffocating end for the unidentified young woman. Detectives theorized that a blunt force blow to the head had likely rendered her unconscious before the killer wrapped her in the green tarp. Trapped within the airless confines of the industrial canvas, the victim probably perished from asphyxiation while unable to scream for any outside assistance. A detailed sketch was eventually released to the public, sparking a wave of desperate calls from families who were searching for their missing daughters. More than a dozen grieving people visited the police station, each hoping to find closure but leaving with either disappointment or a renewed sense. One promising lead involved Loretta Jean Slezer, a teenager who had disappeared a year earlier and matched many of the physical descriptions of Tent Girl. However, the height of the missing girl did not match the autopsy report, forcing investigators to cross her name off their shrinking list of possibilities. Another potential identity emerged from Maryland, where a detective noticed striking similarities between the Kentucky victim and a missing girl named Debbie Crane. The Crane family endured a stressful journey to Georgetown to view the autopsy photos, but the condition of the body prevented a positive visual identification. Just as dental records seemed to confirm a match, a mysterious anonymous caller claimed that Debbie was actually alive and living in another state. Police eventually located the girl living comfortably with her boyfriend, which provided a happy ending for one family but left Tent Girl nameless again. A third mother believed the victim was her daughter Doris. Yet this lead also vanished when the runaway girl was found alive and well. Each time a door to the truth seemed to open, it was slammed shut by the harsh reality of false hope and investigative dead ends. Desperate for any connection, the Kentucky State Police looked toward a similar murder in Pennsylvania involving a body found inside a canvas duffel bag. Forensic analysis of the fabric proved the cases were unrelated, leaving the detectives with no choice but to wait for a miracle to occur. As the weeks turned into months, the once ringing police hotlines went silent, and the file on the Tent Girl began to gather thick dust. Officer Harold Mueller refused to give up and created a new sketch with a rounder face, hoping the gap-toothed smile would trigger someone's forgotten memory. Despite a partial fingerprint being recovered from the remains, the technology of the 1960s was insufficient to identify the girl or her killer. By January of 1969, lead investigator Virgil Pryor admitted to the local press that the identity of the woman might never be known. A true crime magazine published her story to reach a wider audience. But even national exposure failed to produce a single viable lead at first. The nameless victim was eventually buried under a cold stone that listed only her estimated age, height, and the date she was finally found. For nearly 30 years, she remained a ghost in the system, a forgotten daughter resting in a grave, marked by clinical details and profound silence. The world moved forward, while the secret of the green tarp stayed buried in the Kentucky soil, waiting for someone to listen to its story. That silence would finally be broken in 1987, when a 17-year-old boy named Todd Matthews heard a terrifying story from his girlfriend's family. Lori Ann Riddle told him about the day her father discovered a body, unknowingly lighting a fire of obsession that would last for decades. Todd felt a strange empathy for the nameless girl, perhaps because he had lost his own siblings as infants and understood the pain of loss. He vowed to find her name, unaware that his journey would eventually revolutionize the way cold cases are investigated by the global community of sleuths. Todd Matthews began his journey by collecting every yellowed newspaper clipping that mentioned the mysterious girl found in the heavy green canvas. He spent countless hours in the quiet corners of local libraries, desperately searching for any detail that the original investigators might have overlooked. The young factory worker felt a heavy weight of responsibility toward the nameless woman who had been discarded like common industrial waste. His future father-in-law, Wilbur Riddle, provided a first-hand account of that dark night, which continued to haunt his memories for many years. Wilbur insisted that the victim appeared much older than the teenage estimates provided by the medical examiners during the initial 1968 autopsy. This single observation from the man who touched the bundle suggested that the police had been searching within the wrong age demographic. Todd also focused on the small towel found with the remains, which he suspected was actually a cloth diaper used for an infant. If the tent girl was a mother, it would explain why she was carrying such a specific item at the time of her death. The investigation became a ritual of obsession for Todd, who balanced his demanding factory job with the relentless pursuit of a ghost. Without the convenience of the modern internet, he relied on physical mail and expensive long-distance phone calls to reach potential witnesses and agencies. His marriage faced significant strain as the mounting phone bills and constant research created regular arguments between him and his wife Lori. Lori struggled to understand why her husband was so deeply invested in a case that had been cold since before he was born. Despite the domestic tension, Todd felt an unbreakable obligation to provide the nameless girl with the dignity of a proper identity and burial. He transformed from an inexperienced amateur into a methodical investigator, developing a sharp eye for the smallest patterns within the dusty police files. Every night after his family went to sleep, he retreated to a makeshift office to study the autopsy photos and the artist's sketches. He wasn't just looking for clues. He was trying to build a bridge between the living world and the girl in the tarp. For a decade, he ran in circles, hitting the same walls that had stopped the Kentucky State Police 30 years in the past. The breakthrough finally arrived in the early 1990s, when a new technology called the Internet began to connect the entire world instantly. Todd recognized that this digital tool could reach people across vast distances far more efficiently than traditional mail or local newspaper advertisements. He realized that the missing girl's family might not even live in Kentucky, making the reach of the World Wide Web absolutely essential. In 1997, he launched a dedicated website called tentgirl.com to serve as a central clearinghouse for all known information about the case. He uploaded the sketches, the physical descriptions, and the haunting details of the green canvas to the burgeoning community of online crime sleuths. This digital archive allowed anyone with a computer to examine the evidence and perhaps recognize a sister, a mother, or a long-lost friend. Todd spent his late nights moderating message boards and exchanging emails with other dedicated volunteers who shared his passion for solving cold cases. One evening in 1998, while scanning a database of missing persons, his eyes locked onto a post that made his heart race. A woman named Rosemary Westbrook was searching for her sister, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor, who had vanished from Lexington in late 1967. The description listed brown hair, a height of 5 feet 2 inches, and a specific location only a few miles from the recovery site. Most importantly, Rosemary mentioned that her sister was 24 years old and had a young daughter at the time she went missing. Todd remembered Wilbur Riddle's insistence that the girl was older and his own theory about the cloth diaper found near the decomposed remains. He felt a sudden, electric surge of adrenaline as he realized the physical profile of Barbara perfectly matched the girl in the green tarp. His hands trembled with excitement as he typed a carefully worded reply to Rosemary, hoping this would finally be the missing piece. He bolted into the bedroom to wake his wife, shouting that he had finally found her after 10 long years of tireless searching. When Todd and Rosemary eventually spoke on the phone, they began a meticulous comparison of every physical detail known to both the family. They discussed the hair color, the height, and the very specific cavity that created a noticeable gap in the front of her teeth. Every detail fell into place like a perfectly constructed puzzle, leaving little doubt in Todd's mind that the search was finally over. However, the seasoned investigator knew that a gut feeling was not enough to satisfy the legal requirements of the Kentucky medical examiner. They needed scientific proof to confirm the identity. And luckily, the emerging field of DNA testing offered a solution that didn't exist. Todd helped Rosemary contact the state forensic officials, but they were initially skeptical of a lead provided by an amateur internet detective. At that time, police departments did not yet trust the work of cyber sleuths who operated outside of the traditional law enforcement structure. Undeterred by their cold reception, Todd presented a mountain of compelling evidence that forced the officials to take his claims very seriously. The state eventually agreed to exhuming the remains of the tent girl from her nameless grave in the Scott County Cemetery. Forensic experts collected samples from the teeth and bones to compare against the DNA provided by Rosemary Westbrook and her family. For several agonizing weeks, Todd and the family waited in silence for the laboratory to return the results of the complex genetic testing. On April 26, 1998, exactly 30 years after her discovery, the laboratory officially confirmed that the tent girl was Barbara Taylor. The nameless ghost finally had her identity restored, and the first major cold case solved by the internet became a part of history. The restoration of Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor's name shifted the focus of the investigation from a mystery of identity toward a cold-blooded murder. Investigators now possessed a starting point to trace the final movements of the 24-year-old woman before her life was cruelly stolen away. New details emerged regarding her marriage to George Earl Taylor, a man who worked within the traveling circuits of a local carnival. This specific occupation provided a chilling explanation for the heavy green canvas tarp that had served as her makeshift and industrial shroud. The material was identified as a professional-grade fabric, commonly used for circus tents, a resource George could access with great ease. Furthermore, the small white towel found with the remains was confirmed to be a cloth diaper belonging to their 8-month-old infant daughter. Everything that once seemed like random debris now pointed toward a domestic tragedy that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. George Earl Taylor quickly became the primary suspect as police uncovered a history of his explosive temper and very volatile behavior. Perhaps the most damning evidence was the fact that George had never filed an official missing person report for his young wife. Instead of seeking help from the authorities, he allegedly told Barbara's grieving family that she had simply left him for another man. This calculated lie allowed the perpetrator to continue his life without scrutiny, while his wife's body decayed in a Kentucky ditch. Unfortunately, the wheels of justice turned far too slowly for the family, as the prime suspect escaped a trial through his death. George Earl Taylor had passed away from cancer in October of 1987, just as Todd Matthews began his obsessive search. With the suspect deceased, the case remained officially unsolved, leaving the specific details of her final moments forever locked in the past. Despite the lack of a conviction, Barbara's family finally received the closure they had been denied for more than 30 long years. Her original nameless tombstone was replaced with a new marker that proudly displayed her name and her role as a loving mother. Todd Matthews did not stop his work after solving the tent girl case, instead choosing to help others facing similar tragic mysteries. He helped found the Doe Network, a non-profit organization that empowers amateur sleuths to assist law enforcement with unidentified person cases. His pioneering efforts in cyber sleuthing earned him international recognition, and a respected position as a consultant for high-profile media projects. Todd eventually served as a director for NamUs, the national online database that continues to connect missing persons with their frantic families. The legacy of his determination lived on until his untimely passing in January of 2024 at the age of 53. He died at his home in Tennessee, leaving behind his wife Lorianne and a world forever changed by his digital persistence. The impact of the Tent Girl investigation proved that the internet could be a powerful tool for truth in the hands of citizens. Even decades after a crime occurs, the persistent search for a name can eventually pierce the silence of a cold and nameless grave. Barbara's story serves as a somber reminder that every victim deserves to be remembered by more than just their physical autopsy measurements. While her killer never faced a courtroom, the light of the truth finally exposed the dark secret hidden within that green canvas. The silence of the Kentucky woods no longer holds the secret of the girl who once had no name but now rests. Modern investigators continue to use the methods Todd perfected to bring peace to the hundreds of John and Jane Does across America. Every digital connection made on a forum or database brings the world one step closer to ending the cycle of systemic silence. As we look back on this landmark case, we must acknowledge the power of empathy in solving the most impossible cold cases. The journey of a factory worker and a forgotten girl remains one of the most significant chapters in the history of true crime. Through the screen of a computer, a 30-year-old mystery was dismantled, proving that no victim is ever truly beyond the reach of hope. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor is no longer just a tent girl, but a woman whose identity was reclaimed from the shadows of time. The investigation into her life and death has paved the way for a new era of collaborative and transparent forensic detective work. We must never forget that behind every cold case file is a human being waiting for their story to be told once again. The green tarp that once symbolized a horrific end now serves as a testament to the resilience of those who seek the truth. Her name is now etched in stone, a permanent defiance against the killer who tried to erase her existence from the living world. The echoes of the Tent Girl case continue to inspire a global community of volunteers dedicated to the pursuit of missing person justice. Though the road to discovery was long and filled with disappointment, the final outcome provided a light in the darkness of tragedy. The story of Barbara Taylor reminds us all that the truth is a debt we owe to the dead and the living alike. As the sun sets over the cemetery in Georgetown, the quiet peace of identified daughter finally blankets the once troubled Kentucky soil. We move forward with the knowledge that one person's obsession can indeed change the course of history for a grieving family. The digital fingerprints left by Todd Matthews will guide future generations of investigators as they navigate the complexities of human identity. Our narrative concludes here. But the lessons learned from the Tent Girl will remain a vital part of the investigative landscape forever. Thank you for joining us as we delved into the haunting history of a woman who was lost but is now found. The official closing of the identity phase did not immediately silence the haunting questions surrounding the final moments of Barbara Taylor. Investigators began to reconstruct the atmosphere of the 1967 carnival circuit, where George Earl Taylor worked as a manual laborer. The industrial green tarp used to shroud Barbara was a common sight within the traveling shows that moved through rural Kentucky. This heavy canvas material was designed to withstand the elements. Yet it became a cold and airless tomb for a young mother. Records indicate that the specific type of fabric was rarely sold to the general public, further linking the crime to George. Family members recalled that George possessed an unsettling and possessive nature that often manifested in sudden bursts of intense verbal aggression. When Barbara vanished, her absence was explained away by George as a simple case of a woman abandoning her infant child. This narrative was a calculated attempt to smear her character while ensuring that no one would go looking for her remains. The presence of the cloth diaper near her body suggests that she may have been caring for her daughter when attacked. It paints a heartbreaking picture of a mother who was likely trying to protect her child before being rendered completely unconscious. Forensic theories suggest the killer utilized the tarp to hide the evidence of his violence from the prying eyes of neighbors. By wrapping her tightly and securing the ends, the perpetrator transformed a human being into a discarded and unrecognizable roadside bundle. The sheer weight and bulk of the wrapped body would have required significant physical strength to move and eventually dump. George's daily work with heavy carnival equipment provided him with the necessary physical power to handle such a grim and difficult task. Despite these logical deductions, the lack of a living suspect meant that many forensic details would never be tested in court. Todd Matthews often reflected on the strange timing of George's death, which occurred just as the investigation began to gain momentum. It was as if the universe had allowed the secret to stay buried until the digital age was ready to reveal it. The technological gap between 1968 and 1998 was a chasm that only persistence and empathy could eventually cross. Todd's work demonstrated that the internet was more than a novelty. It was a revolutionary archive for the voices of the lost. He became a symbol of hope for thousands of other families who were still staring at the blank pages of cold files. The Doe network grew from a small website into a global force that has helped identify hundreds of nameless individuals since. Barbara's sister, Rosemary, finally had a place to visit and mourn, a luxury she had been denied for 3 agonizing decades. The reddish-brown hair and the distinctive gap in her teeth were no longer just clues, but cherished memories of Barbara. Every time a new John or Jane Doe is identified, the legacy of the Tent Girl case is whispered among investigators. It serves as the ultimate proof that no case is truly impossible if someone is willing to look long enough. The industrial landscape of Georgetown, Kentucky, will always be linked to the woman who was found, but never truly forgotten. We must continue to question the systemic silences that allow such tragedies to remain hidden for so many long years. The intersection of true crime and digital activism began in a small Tennessee factory office under the glow of a monitor. Todd's sons now carry the stories of their father's work, ensuring that his impact on the world will never fade. As we transition into the final chapters of this narrative, we look toward the future of forensic science and community involvement. The tools may change, but the fundamental human need for a name and a story remains as strong as ever. Barbara Taylor's journey from a green tarp to a marked grave is a triumph of the human spirit over clinical indifference. She is a reminder that the dead still speak to us, provided we are willing to listen to their silent testimonies. The investigation of her life has taught us that the truth is often hidden beneath the layers of our own assumptions. We honor her memory by continuing the search for all those who remain unidentified and lost in the shadows of history. The final resolution of the Tent Girl mystery stands as a beacon of light for the field of modern investigative journalism. Even though the killer escaped earthly punishment, the restoration of Barbara's dignity is a victory that cannot be taken away. The story of the girl in the canvas tarp will continue to haunt and inspire anyone who hears its tragic echoes. We are left to wonder how many other secrets are currently waiting to be discovered by a persistent and curious mind. The journey of Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor has come to a close, but the mission to find the lost continues. The investigation moved into a phase of deep reflection regarding the systemic failures that allowed Barbara to remain unidentified for 30 years. Initial reports from 1968 were plagued by a narrow focus on the victim's age, which led many potential families to turn away. Detectives at the time had relied heavily on a physical sketch that many now believe did not capture her true essence or likeness. Furthermore, the lack of centralized communication between different state police departments meant that many missing person reports were never properly cross-referenced. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor had been a daughter, a sister, and a mother whose existence was reduced to a set of clinical measurements. The twisted vision of the killer involved discarding her in a manner that suggested she was nothing more than industrial circus equipment. George Earl Taylor's ability to manipulate the narrative of her disappearance highlighted the vulnerability of women traveling within the transient carnival circuits. He allegedly exploited the silence of the era, knowing that a woman leaving her family was a story that few would ever question. Todd Matthews recognized this systemic silence and sought to give a voice to those who had been erased by such callous domestic violence. His transition from a curious teenager to a master of digital forensics became a blueprint for the future of citizen-led criminal investigations. The signature mark that ultimately broke the case was not a high-tech fingerprint, but a simple human gap between 2 front teeth. This small physical detail, preserved through decades of decay, served as the final anchor for a family's drifting and heavy hope. When the DNA results finally confirmed the match, the uncanny valley of the nameless tent girl was replaced by a tragic reality. Rosemary Westbrook could finally stop scanning the faces of strangers, knowing exactly where her sister had been all those long, lonely years. The heavy green tarp, once a symbol of a terrifying and airless end, became a key piece of evidence in a global story. It reminded the world that the materials of our daily lives can often hide the darkest and most painful of human secrets. Todd's obsession with the case was not merely a hobby, but a profound act of empathy for a woman he never met. He refused to let the systemic silence of the 1960s prevent a 1990s solution to this ancient and cold mystery. The Doe Network stands as a living monument to his belief that every person deserves the dignity of a known and respected name. Volunteer sleuths around the globe now follow the path he blazed, using the internet to bring light into the darkest of corners. Barbara's story taught an entire generation that the truth is often just a single, well-placed digital connection away from being fully realized. We must acknowledge that while science provided the final proof, it was human persistence that initially drove the search for Barbara. The tragedy of her death is now balanced by the triumph of her identification and the restoration of her place in history. George Earl Taylor may have escaped the judgment of a jury, but he could not escape the eventual exposure of his crime. His death in 1987 did not end the investigation, but rather passed the torch to a new kind of modern detective. The Tent Girl case remains the primary example of how the uncanny can be transformed into the deeply personal through digital activism. As we move toward the final part of our narrative, we reflect on the legacy of both the victim and her champion. The Kentucky soil no longer guards a secret, but instead protects the remains of a woman who is finally and truly home. Every stone in the Georgetown cemetery tells a story, but none are quite as loud or as persistent as Barbara Ann's. We are reminded that the passage of time does not diminish our collective responsibility to seek justice for the many lost souls. The connection between a well digger's discovery and a factory worker's website is a testament to the unpredictable nature of truth. Through the fog of 30 years, a clear picture finally emerged, revealing a life that was much more than a roadside bundle. Barbara Taylor's face, once a distorted sketch, is now a clear and smiling memory for the grandchildren she never had the chance. The industrial green canvas has been folded away into the archives of history, leaving only the truth behind for us to examine. Our investigation now turns to the final impact this case had on the world of forensics and the future of cold cases. The ultimate resolution of the Tent Girl mystery fundamentally altered the landscape of missing persons investigations within the United States. Todd Matthews transitioned from a persistent amateur into a globally recognized leader within the specialized field of cold case advocacy. His innovative use of the internet to bridge the gap between families and authorities proved that traditional methods were often insufficient. The creation of the Doe Network provided a structured platform for thousands of volunteers to apply their skills to unsolved cases. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor's story became the primary case study for how digital databases can successfully identify long-forgotten John and Jane Does. By 1998, the world finally recognized that a name is the most basic human right that every victim deserves. The signature mark of her dental gap remained the silent witness that waited 30 years for the right person to listen. Forensic science and DNA technology eventually provided the legal certainty that Todd's digital investigation had already suggested through sheer human intuition. George Earl Taylor's twisted vision of a disposable wife was permanently dismantled by the restoration of Barbara's true identity and history. The systemic silence of the 1960s was replaced by the loud and persistent advocacy of the modern online detective community. Even after Todd's passing in 2024, his legacy continues to influence how law enforcement agencies interact with citizen-led groups. The NAMA's database stands as a technological testament to his belief that information should be accessible to everyone seeking the truth. Barbara's grave in Georgetown is no longer a place of clinical mystery, but a site of profound peace for her family. Her children and grandchildren now possess the knowledge of their heritage, a gift that was nearly erased by a green tarp. The industrial canvas that once suffocated a young mother is now merely a dark chapter in a much larger story of resilience. We are reminded that the passage of 3 decades cannot hide the truth if one person refuses to look away. The uncanny discovery by Wilbur Riddle in 1968 was finally brought to a compassionate conclusion by his own son-in-law. This circular journey of fate and determination highlights the interconnectedness of human lives across the vast stretches of time and space. Every unidentified person file represents a family waiting for a phone call that might finally bring their long-lost loved one home. We honor Todd Matthews by continuing the work of looking for those who have been discarded or forgotten by the world. The case of the Tent Girl will forever be remembered as the moment the internet first cracked a truly impossible cold case. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor is finally at rest, her name etched in stone and her story forever preserved in the digital age. As the digital glow of our screens fades, the memory of her reddish-brown hair and her smiling face remains very bright. The silence of the Kentucky hills is now filled with the dignity of a woman who was lost but is now found. Our narrative ends here, but the pursuit of justice for every nameless victim must continue with the same relentless and burning passion.